Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. The Kursk incursion into Russia has changed the rules of engagement of the Russia-Ukraine war. This bold and high-risk move by Ukraine has upped the stakes and has pushed the two sides into a much more protracted conflict that could escalate way beyond anything that's been witnessed since February 2022. The Ukrainian drones have devastated the Russian defenses in Kursk, but paradoxically, instead of pushing back the Ukrainian offensive in Kursk, Moscow has continued to tighten the noose in the eastern battlefront. Pokrovsk, which is a key logistical city that is known as the coal mining capital of Ukraine, is under severe assault. The loss of Pokrovsk would mean that the railway lines that were being used by Kiev to provide supplies to troops along the eastern front lines would be lost to Russia. So how is Russia countering the Kursk incursion strategy? Our next report gets you the details. This video, released by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, will give you a glimpse of what is unfolding in the battlefields of Kursk. Using electronic jammers to jump through the layers of the Russian air defense systems, wave after wave of cheap drones have been launched at Russian tanks and armored vehicles with devastating effect. After destroying 3 bridges over the Siem River last week in Kursk using the American-supplied HIMARS rockets, this week Ukraine targeted Russia's engineering equipment and a pontoon bridge that Moscow had been using for evacuations and logistical supplies. In the Russian port of Kavkaz in the southern Krasnodar region, a Russian ferry with at least about 30 fuel tanks on board was sunk by Ukraine. Ukraine's Air Force's commander, Mykola Oleschuk, shared this video of what he claims are precision strikes on Russia's military positions and equipment in a civilian area after evacuations had been carried out. But what is even more concerning are reports of a drone attack on the Kursk nuclear plant that will be investigated by the IAEA after Russia raised an official complaint.
The enemy tried to strike at the nuclear power station last night. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been informed. They promised to come themselves to send specialists to assess the situation. I hope that, in the end, this will be done on their part.
The Ukrainian strategy is simple. One of the many objectives of the Kursk offensive is to force Russia to divert some of its troops from the eastern battlefront. But the Kremlin's response has been to bide its time. The battle-hardened Russian troops are tightening the noose on Pokrovsk after the capture of New York. This drone footage, released by the 68th Brigade of the Ukrainian forces, gives you a glimpse of the artillery strikes on Russian positions in Pokrovsk. Volodymyr Zelensky has now stated that the Kursk offensive has called the Russian bluff off its territorial red lines.
The world sees that everything in this war depends only on courage. Our courage, the courage of our partners, on brave decisions for Ukraine, on courage in supporting Ukraine, and on brave steps. And not just our steps. It's important that partners are in sync with us in this determination, and then Russia will have no other option left but a just peace. We must force Russia with all our might and together with our partners towards peace.
More than 120,000 Russians have been evacuated from the Kursk region, while its military has intensified its bombardment on Ukrainian positions. Russia has used its fighter jets to drop glide bombs to devastate the Ukrainian armor. But how long can Ukraine continue with its high-risk strategy in Kursk remains a big question. Germany's Olaf Scholz has already voiced concerns that Ukraine had not consulted it before the Kursk offensive. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Kiev this week and again reiterated his message for peace, stating that war is not a solution for any conflict. He urged the Ukrainian president to sit down with the Russian president to sort out the differences.
No conflict can be resolved on the battlefield. The road to resolution can only be found through dialogue and diplomacy. and we should move in that direction without wasting any time. Both sides should sit together to find ways to end this crisis. I want to assure you that India is ready to play an active role in any efforts towards peace. If I can play any role in this personally, I'll do that. I want to assure you as a friend.
तो मैं जरूर करना चाहूँगा एक मित्र के रूप में मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूँ.
The United States has announced another $125 million of military package for Ukraine to add to the more than $55 billion of weapons that the United States has already sent. The Kursk incursion has pushed the Russia-Ukraine war into uncharted territory. But the question is, can cooler heads prevail? For 10 long months, the devastating war in the Gaza Strip has dragged on with an unending supply of American weapons. More than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, of which more than half are said to be innocent women and children. Negotiations can only result in peace when negotiations are carried out in good faith. So the obvious question is this: why have all of these negotiations and the hectic diplomatic activity that we've witnessed over Gaza not yielded any substantial result? And how are the Palestinian people surviving in the hailstorm of bombs that have been dropped on the most densely populated territory on earth? Our next report gets you the details. The scenes in the Gaza Strip resemble the apocalypse. 80% of all buildings have been bombed, and even those that are still standing bear the pockmarks of the devastating Israeli offensive carried out by the use of American weapons. This video, shot by the United Nations staffer Louis Wateridge, will give you a glimpse of the state that the occupied Palestinian territory of Gaza has been reduced to in a war that Israel claims it is fighting to defend itself. Neighborhood after neighborhood, city after Palestinian city that were once teeming with the bustle of people have now been reduced to rubble. Almost every hospital, almost every school, and almost every place of worship has been bombed. 20-year-old Shahid Abu Umar is an engineering student. She has come back to the rubble of the Al-Azhar University that was bombed by Israel. Unlike a student in any other part of the world, for Shahid Abu Umar, the dream of sitting in a classroom again to finish her studies is a difficult one to even dream.
Our simplest dreams are to have a normal life again and live like others. Our simplest dream right now is education. This is an earned right for everyone, but for us, it is a dream. It is a dream for us to return to our university, sit in our classroom, see our professor, attend our lessons, meet with our friends and classmates. Now we do not know anything about anyone. We cannot go to our university or study.
At the few medical facilities that are still standing and still functioning in the Gaza Strip, the steady stream of patients with grievous injuries never ends. Anthony Blinken's shuttle diplomacy to the Middle East has yielded nothing substantial in terms of peace.
One of them is very clear that the United States does not accept any long-term occupation of Gaza by Israel. More specifically, the agreement is very clear on the schedule and the locations of IDF withdrawals from Gaza, and Israel has agreed to that.
But this is clearly the sticking point. Benjamin Netanyahu wants the Israeli soldiers to stay put at the Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. And even the Mossad chief David Barnea, who's been leading the negotiating team for the ceasefire talks, has been critical of Netanyahu's demands. In Jerusalem, family members of the hostages have slammed Netanyahu for failing to get a deal, insisting that the longer Netanyahu fails to secure a deal, more number of Israeli hostages would end up losing their lives.
We came in this evening because the Bibi and the government is killing the hostages, literally one by one. They don't care. They care only about the government and the politics. And someone has to, to cry their voice, to cry for them. There are still 109 hostages. Some of them are already dead, but there are a couple of dozen that are not. And every day is danger for them.
On the other side of the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians have managed to survive the Israeli onslaught so far, call themselves the Walking Dead. Moving from one place to another, as Israel, with the backing of the Americans, has continued with the war, targeting one refugee camp after another, with no sign of a ceasefire or an end to this vicious and unending cycle of violence. Indonesia had a brush with chaos on the 22nd of August. A controversial plan to change the election rules triggered widespread protests. Thousands took to the streets in the capital city of Jakarta and in other major cities in protest against the government's attempt to reverse a constitutional court ruling that upheld a candidate's age requirements. Scenes of chaos were witnessed outside the parliament as the police clashed with the protesters. Tear gas and water cannons were used by the police to quell protests. As the day progressed, the demonstrations swelled. Activists, students, workers, Indonesian celebrities and musicians took part in these protests, concerned about the status of democracy in the Southeast Asian nation. By the end of the day, the parliament relented and dropped the proposed changes for this election period. The protests, however, continued the next day, pressurizing the Indonesian poll body to issue rules for regional elections as well. Our next report gets you the details.
Thousands of angry protesters attempted to storm the parliament building in Jakarta on Thursday to protest controversial revisions to the country's election laws. Occupying roads in front of the parliament complex, they held banners and signs and shouted slogans against the outgoing president, Joko Widodo. A section of the fence was teared down. Things were set ablaze and rocks hurled at the riot police. The police fired tear gas and water cannons in a bid to disperse protesters.
I came here to the Parliament building to represent the aspiration of the people, because this country is now not in good condition. It has been damaged, especially because of President Joko Widodo and his cronies.
Today, the state of democracy in Indonesia is messy and not in good order because of a lot of interference by Joko Widodo, who is abusing his power in the government. Abuse of power to build a political dynasty is a common refrain. On Wednesday, the parliament passed an emergency motion, essentially reversing a constitutional court ruling to change the minimum age to serve as governor to 30. The reversal would have allowed Widodo's youngest son, 29-year-old Kaisang Pangarep, to seek office in Central Java in the upcoming regional contest in November. Plans were afoot to ratify the change in a plenary session on Thursday, but a groundswell of opposition forced the Indonesian lawmakers to scrap the controversial plan.
We want to give the parliament a warning that you shouldn't play with our democratic system. Don't ever toy with our constitution, because even though there was a statement yesterday saying that the vote was cancelled, but at least this is a warning for anyone to not play with our democracy.
Indonesians are increasingly becoming disillusioned with Joko Widodo and his attempts to retain political influence. He completes his second and final 5-year term in October and is not eligible to run again. Not only is his eldest son, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, the incoming vice president, but Widodo is also accused of helping to install his replacement defense chief, Prabowo Subianto. Indonesia's parliament, dominated by the president's supporters and the country's constitutional court, are at loggerheads, and the power tussle could precipitate a political crisis. Add to this the anger on the streets, and we have a dangerous situation threatening to spiral out of control.
The presidential election dispute in Venezuela is refusing to die down. It's been close to a month since Venezuela's National Electoral Council proclaimed Nicolas Maduro to be the winner of the 28th of July presidential elections. The disputed result, which gave Maduro a third six-year term until 2031, has plunged Venezuela into political turbulence and unrest. In anti-Maduro protests, thousands descended onto the streets of the capital Caracas and other cities. The riot police cracked down by firing rubber bullets and tear gas. At least about 25 people have been killed and more than 2,400 have been arrested since the election day. The Electoral Commission hasn't yet provided a detailed breakdown of the results, giving rise to suspicion of deceit. With the opposition remaining defiant and unaccepting of the declared election results, the anti-Maduro protests have now spread to cities around the world, from Australia to Spain and to several other Latin American nations. Our next report gets you more details.
An allegedly stolen election in the oil-rich Latin American nation has precipitated a fight to the end. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who was barred from running in the election, called for nationwide protests on the 17th of August in a bid to intensify pressure on Maduro to concede. Responding to her call, thousands gathered in several cities in Venezuela and elsewhere to join the protest for the truth. Many of them waved the national flag and copies of election records from their voting stations as proof of an opposition victory. Machado herself came out of hiding to join and lead the protesters in the capital, Caracas, and urged them not to be afraid.
This is the time to collect. And what does it mean to collect? That every vote is respected. There is nothing that is above the voice of the sovereign people, and the sovereign people spoke in Venezuela on July 28. We're not going to leave the streets with intelligence, prudence, resilience, boldness, and peacefully, because violence benefits them. We do not attack other Venezuelans.
The opposition claims an overwhelming win for its candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia, in the last month's presidential elections, and points an accusatory finger at strongman Maduro of stealing the elections. Maduro, on the other hand, has called for Machado and González Urrutia to be arrested, accusing them of seeking to foment a coup d'etat. On the same day, at a rally of his supporters outside the Miraflores presidential palace, Maduro accused González Urrutia, who last appeared in public at a protest on 30th of July, of trying to flee the country.
He is hiding in a cave and he's preparing his escape from Venezuela. Edmundo González Urrutia is taking the money and going to Miami.
In response to the call by Venezuela's opposition leader Maria Corina Machado to join the protest for the truth, demonstrations were held in many parts of the world, with many waving Venezuelan flags, holding protest signs and singing the Venezuelan national anthem.
My dream is to return to shake hands with my country, because that criminal Nicolas Maduro is destroying an entire people. He is kidnapping a nation.
From Australia to Spain and also in the United Kingdom, Canada, Colombia, Mexico and Argentina, the clamor is growing against Nicolas Maduro's disputed claim of having won re-election with 52% of the vote. The European Union, the United States, and a number of Latin American nations have refused to recognize the disputed result.
Maduro's previous re-election in 2018 was also rejected by the United States, European Union and several Latin American countries. The writing is on the wall. Will Maduro, who until now has strongly denied electoral fraud and blamed the opposition of instigating a coup, recognize his defeat and hand over power peacefully?
The Balkan nation of Bosnia Herzegovina was jolted by a rare school shooting on the 21st of August. 3 staff members at a secondary school in northwest Bosnia were shot dead by a disgruntled school employee who then tried to kill himself. An investigation is underway to probe the killing of the school principal, the school secretary and a retired English teacher. Though the school had not yet reopened from the summer holiday, some students were on the premises for repeat examinations. Mass shootings are comparatively rare in the Western Balkans, though the region is awash with weapons that have remained in private hands from the wars in the 1990s. Our next report gets you the details.
As the Bosnian summer holiday period was coming to an end, a high school in the town of Sanski Most was gearing up for the upcoming academic year. A meeting had been called by the teachers who were caught unaware by a janitor at the school who used an automatic rifle to kill 3 staff members before training the gun on himself. The assailant was wounded and taken to a hospital in Banja Luka in the north in critical condition.
When police arrived on the scene, they discovered the bodies of 3 people killed on the school premises. The bodies of the school principal, whose initials are NH, the school secretary NK, and a teacher GM. The attacker, whose initials are VM, fatally shot these people with an automatic weapon. He then attempted suicide, seriously injuring himself. His life is in danger.
Police have not yet provided any motive for the shooting, which took place at about 10 a.m. local time. But the local media reported that the assailant, who had a history of disagreements with the management, was under disciplinary proceedings and he sought out specific people and shot them. The rare isolated shooting has left the residents and the authorities shocked and in a state of disbelief.
We were all surprised at Sanski Most by this event. It's something you can't be prepared for. It's something that doesn't happen very often. We don't remember anything like this here. I would like to tell the residents that this is an isolated case.
The violence comes on the heels of high-profile mass shootings in other Balkan nations in recent years, including back-to-back attacks that rocked Serbia last year. And last month, in one of Croatia's worst shootings since it declared independence in 1991, a gunman had killed 5 residents and 1 employee at a Croatian nursing home. Whether these recent violent incidents are an aberration of the emergence of a pattern will be established over a period of time, but for now, the small, peaceful town of 40,000 people, they are struggling to comprehend and come to terms with the rare tragedy.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.